Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. And today what I'm going to show you is how you can paint up US Marines during the Vietnam conflict. Now this fella here, he is one of the plastic Rubicon miniatures. They're best known for their tanks and such, but they do now do a range of plastic miniatures for the Vietnam conflict. So that's pretty interesting. Something I had to check out for myself. Now, as always, all of the paints for this one will be listed in the description below, but most of the highlights that I'm going to use today are actually mixes. So I'll talk about that a little when we come to them. Let's get started. So just a quick note on the Rubicon miniatures that I'm going to be painting today. If you've never come across them, they are very much like most of Rubicon's other stuff, meaning that they're quite fussy about scale. These guys are very much, everything is the size it should be, so it's perfectly proportioned. Does make it a little bit interesting to paint, because instead of having some of the larger equipment pouches and stuff you might be used to, this is very accurate. It is that attention to detail that Rubicon has on their vehicles applied to their infantry. They are a bugger to assemble, I'll be honest. They were very fiddly, but if you're patient, they do actually look really nice. Like, here's another fella here. You know, they're nice miniatures, and the price is right for a box. I paid 33 euros or something, and there are 30 guys in the box. So it's not like they're breaking the bank. In the future, if I was going to do a Vietnam platoon, I would still probably go to Empress or Gringo 40s, pick up the metal miniatures. But if you're just looking for a single platoon or maybe even a squad, then these guys are not bad. So I know that's kind of a backhanded review, but they're nice. They're just not what I ordinarily like painting. But all the same, once you've got them assembled, I've hit them with a primer spray of premium grey from Vallejo. Anything light, you could even use a white here if you wanted to, but a grey I think is going to help us dull down some of these colours. If you wanted to paint them really quickly, what you could do would be to hit them with a spray from Vallejo of US Olive Drab, give it a quick dry brush, paint the skin, shade him, and that would be accurate. The wonderful truism of uniform isn't holds true in Vietnam as it did pretty much anywhere. So don't worry too much about following these colors I'm going to use exactly. First color we're going to actually apply is Tanned Flesh from the Army Painter. You can use whatever skin color you like here. I just like Tanned Flesh because it's a little bit redder than some of the others you'll find out there without being super dark. So the way that I like to shade my miniatures, this works quite well. You'll see it also covers really nicely over this light gray. Now, concerning his uniform, I'm going to paint this in two colors. What I want is for his trousers to look properly worn and salty, and for this I'm going to use green-grey. This is quite a pale one going on. It will darken down quite a bit and look a little bit more natural, but for a pair of trousers that have been up country for a while, green-grey is going to work fine. So, nice quick shot of this over his pants. Now, if there is a quote-unquote correct color for the uniform of this period, it's probably US dark green. This is a wonderful dark green, very rich by comparison to that green-grey we've just applied. So our fella here has presumably gone to stores, got himself a nice new shirt. But yeah, you'll see, in the same way, this covers very well. Now, the difference between those two is quite pronounced, but it's accurate. Honestly, I saw a lot more faded gear in the color photos than I did brand new, freshly issued stuff. Speaking of, what I have here is Middlestone, and I'm going to use this to paint in his flak jacket. Now, the jackets would have been issued in a color very similar to the US dark green, but they faded super quickly. And almost all of the photos I've seen feature these either a very pale greenish color, like I'm using here with Middlestone, or even a beige. You know, German Camo Beige would probably work quite well for this as well. So away we go. Painting in the flak jacket. Now, for his canteens, his butt pack, his K-bar, and that sort of thing, this is US Olive Drab. Nice and quick, this one. Now, this bandolier across his chest, his helmet cover, and the strap on his rifle, I am going to paint with German Camo Beige. You could also use khaki if you wanted a darker finish for any one of these, but once it's shaded, I think that's going to be fine. Now, the helmet covers themselves weren't actually beige, but they faded to a very grimy brown. All the same, what I'm going to do is apply a little bit of the US dark green we used earlier, and we're going to put some of the camo pattern on there, because these were quite iconic in a sense. So just little patches. And then doing the same thing again, overlapping some of that green. What I've got is German Camo Pale Brown. And you can use any brown you fancy here. You could use flat earth or tanned earth. But you just want to break up some of the shapes again. Now there is one last thing to do on the helmet, and that is the helmet band itself. Now, Marines actually weren't issued these until 1968, it turns out, so they would use all sorts of other materials if they wanted to make their own, and quite commonly it was rubber. So I'm using here German grey. This is a nice dark black-grey sort of colour with a little hint of blue in it, and I'm going to use this to paint in the helmet band, and as well, we'll also use that same colour for his boots, his M16, parts of his K-bar, anything which is going to be black. Now, something I don't often do is to use a true black paint, because it tends to look a little unrealistic, but for the M16, that's exactly what I want. So I'm using here black, and I'm going to paint the plastic parts with this. And then that's all of our base coats done. So once I've finished this off, what I'm going to do is cruise around the miniature and just do any last minute tidy up I need to do. Once you've done your tidy up and everything has had a chance to dry, it's time to go ahead and shade them. Now what I've got is my pot here of mixed up Agrax Earthshade and Lahmian Medium. This is a half and half mix. And whatever shade you do choose to use, I would recommend thinning it down is going to give you a better result, because you don't want to make this too dark. But once you've got it all shaken up, go ahead and jam this over the entire miniature. Make sure that you are really working it into the recesses, because these Rubicon miniatures, they don't tend to have very deep details in some areas, particularly on straps and things. But away we go, going to cover over the whole thing, and then give them about half an hour to dry. Now once he's dried, we'll have something that looks like this, and finally he's looking a little bit more reasonable. Now what I'm going to do is to highlight most of the miniature, and I'm going to do that using a couple of mixes. I'm going to use two separate colors for this. I've got here Deck Tan, which is a Vallejo color, along with Pale Sand. And the difference between the pair of these is mostly in the end result that I want from the color I'm mixing them into. So for example, the Middlestone, I will mix in some Pale Sand to highlight his flak jacket, whereas with his trousers, I want them to look quite faded and a bit grimy, so Deck Tan I'm going to mix into there. Now the ratio for most of these is going to be one part of the base color to one part of the highlight mix. Let's get a look at what I mean with that. So starting here on his trousers, this is the green, gray, and Deck Tan mix. Now mixing these up, I did mention that half and half is about what you want. But if you're not convinced you're going to get exactly the right mix, then more of the base color is always going to be the right choice, because you can add a little bit more Deck Tan as you go if you feel you need to. Now, as well, this will look quite bright going on, but as it dries, it'll become a bit more subtle. Now the US Field Drab will mix in the same again, just roughly half and half of the Deck Tan. Now for the German Camo Beige, I've mixed in a little bit more Deck Tans. This is probably about 2 parts Deck Tan to 1 on the Beige. Mostly because German Camo Beige is a lighter color to start with. Now I'm going to swap to Pale Sand for my highlight mix, and I've popped a little bit of this into the Middlestone. And then Pale Sand and US Dark Green. Let's pick where we're going to start. Now, unfortunately, the amount of green I'm using on this miniature has kind of messed with the color balance on my camera. So some of this is going to look quite blue and washed out at this point, but I'll fix that with the picture at the end. Now some of these are going to become a little bit more evident once we varnish them, but what I'm going to do now is to paint in his skin. And for this I'm going to swap back to the Citadel line, and I'm going to use Cadian Flesh Tone to cover over most of his skin and leave that tanned flesh in the recesses. Now that'll make quite a difference to the miniature. What we'll do now is use some Kislev flesh, and now we're going to start bulking out some of the details, so curves in his arm, back of his knuckles and fingers, that sort of thing. Particularly on his face, because these Rubicon sculpts are kind of featureless. What we'll do is start painting on some of his expressions, so a little L shape on his cheekbones, painting in his chin, that sort of thing. Now, don't tell anybody, but I'm actually having more fun painting this guy than I thought I would. So I have a little bit of Flayed One flesh here, and I'm going to use this to just polish off his chin, very tip of his nose, and a little straight line under his eyes. Now in his mouth, what I'm going to do is put a tiny wee bit of Caribou Crimson just right onto his tongue, and I might do this off camera. Can I get that in there? Was that in the way? Yeah, boy. Now I did sneak in on his teeth earlier with some Deck Tan, but it's not quite light enough. What I'm going to use instead is ivory here. You could use a white, but he's going to have a full-on Hollywood smile with a really bright teeth like that, but ivory will do the job. There is one final highlight that I want to do, and it might surprise you a little. What I'm going to do first, though, is actually to varnish the miniature. Mostly this is so that I can see what on earth I'm doing, but yeah, nice and quick here. You can use any varnish you like. This is Varnish Plus from Instar. Now first off, you'll see what a difference the varnish makes to our miniature. Anytime you get the opportunity, think about what varnish you want to use to really accentuate what you're working on. I like a satin finish on things like Space Marines, but a nice strong matte just does the business for most historical things. Now, big surprise, you'll see me holding here a pencil. This is a B. I recommend a 2B if you can get your hands on one, because it's a little bit softer. What I'm going to do is just buff the metal parts of the M16 using the pencil. Now there was a trick first shown to me which works on tanks, also works really well on personal weapons. So, choice. What I'm going to do now is to base him up, and let's get a look at what he looks like when he is all finished. And there at last, our Marine is complete. And it is a lot of fun doing something outside of your usual historic period. You folks have probably seen me paint quite a lot of World War II stuff, so stepping forward a little bit and looking at some of the new gear that was becoming available, and as well just how a uniform would age as it got grubby and worn in the field, becomes pretty interesting. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers, Alan, Kyrie, Rod, Jimmy, Andrew, and Phil. You're the folks that help me keep buying little plastic toys. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all. It's been a long one today, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.